and I don't know if it's because we have got people's attention, but lately there has just been all sorts of stuff out there to read and to know about Common Core. So I know Kay said that I was going to deliver the speech that I gave to the Toastmasters group, but that speech in dog years was 22 minutes, so I'm not sure we have time to do all of it. So I'm going to try to hit some highlights, and it sounds like at least part of you in this room know as much or more about Common Core than I do. But the one thing I do know is those that don't remember the past are doomed or condemned to repeat it. Common Core knowledge is the nationalized school curriculum, and it has been adopted by 45 states. When I gave this talk, I read recently 46 states, but I'm not positive about that. 4 U.S. territories, Washington, D.C., and the U.S. Department of Military Schools. Brings it to mind in the past where we have tried to teach our kids whole word reading without using phonics, and then there was the new math. Teachers were resistant, and that went away. Fast forward 40 years from new math and enter Common Core curriculum. Common Core curriculum, as I discovered Sunday night while listening to Huckabee's show, was started originally, and it was called what? Something by the governors. It was only to enrich English and science curriculum in the schools. But by 2009, the U.S. Governors Association had decided that they would adopt Common Core curriculum in order to garner Race to the Top funds, which was started by the Obama administration's education czar, Arne Duncan. And some teachers describe Race to the Top as No Child Left Behind, left on steroids. By 2010, it had been adopted under the guise of being adopted by the governors of each state. And you may be thinking all the more reason to push for school voucher system, private schools, or private Christian schools. But according to the Cato Institute, the government doesn't have to mandate curriculum to control content. When standards are tied to the test, by which the school's performance is evaluated, the school will have no choice but to conform. The test will de facto dictate the contents. What concepts are taught, when, and even how, including charter schools, private schools, and homeschoolers. They are required to administer the nationalized tests. The country's 2 college placements exams, ACT and SATs, are now gearing their placement exams to Common Core. Claims that Common Core don't tell a teacher how to teach in the same way is like saying the high jump bar doesn't tell a jumper how to jump. You could theoretically jump over that bar in any way you wish, but because of how the jump is structured, there's a clear advantage to doing the Fosbury flop. The handout that I gave you is a brief description of some of the cherry-picked curriculum that I got off of the Common Core website. I won't go through all of that right now because we have a lot of things to cover, but the things that are on that list really, really jump out at me. Well, it's true that Common Core standards themselves do not dictate precisely what teachers teach, but by default, the teachers are limited to teaching only what the standards cover. The list is rich. The list is amazing. But by the time the teachers understand what's on the test, and the students must master those tests, it will limit what the teachers may use as far as enriching their classroom curriculum. The standards were not state-led. They were federally incentivized by stimulus funds through the Department of Education's Race to the Top grant, and they were created and copyrighted by 2 trade organizations. And because they are copyrighted, they cannot be altered by any state for any reason. When a set of nationalized standards is copyrighted, we should stop and ask why. How much money is to be made by the 2 organizations, and who's holding the copyright to those materials and methods listed? Other questions that beg to be answered are: what exactly are your students being taught? Is the curriculum age appropriate? Is the content actually and accurately presented? And the elephant in the room is the question of the huge cost of instituting Common Core. How much money is being spent retraining teachers and updating textbooks? And in last night's Oregonian, there was an article that the Tigard and Tualatin School District teachers are having a real problem with the 3rd grade reading. They weren't trained. They can't teach Common Core reading in the 3rd grade in the Tualatin Tigard School District. That was in last night's Oregonian. I don't know how hard it is to teach a 3rd grader. We have one. It's pretty easy, but that's just me. No one knows how much exactly it's going to cost. It's all local issues. The question is surely to ask your local school district, especially when education dollars are being directed away from the classroom and the facilities and toward compensation to employees. But that's a discussion for another time. There is some hope. 16 states have decided to push back against Common Core by submitting bills to their state legislature to reject funding for Common Core standards testing. Of course, 45 states' governors like Common Core. However, 16 states' legislatures do not. It sounds like most of you are fairly interested in Common Core and you've done your homework. Some thoughts since I made this speech in whenever it was, July. The constitutional authority for education rests with the states and localities and ultimately with parents, not the federal government. A brief history lesson tells us in 1806, Thomas Jefferson considered federal presence in education to be unconstitutional. The issue of federal government being involved in education kept being raised in 1862. The first Morrill Act, M-O-R-R-I-L-L, donating federal lands for higher education was passed. And in 1890, a second Morrill Act was passed, providing federal funds for land-grant colleges. And through the years, the federal government has crept closer and nearer to dictating what the states would be doing education-wise. And by 1979, the clarity of Jefferson's position, which required a constitutional amendment, prior to a congressional assumption of jurisdiction over education, had been ignored, and in 1979, President Jimmy Carter signed into law the cabinet-level position of the Department of Education. The cabinet position was opposed by the Republicans as unconstitutional. The Democrats, however, argued that the authority of the Department of Education was part of the Commerce Clause, taxing authority in the Constitution, and it was part of the federal government purview. Federal dictates to education were not terribly intrusive until 2001, when President George Bush signed the No Child Left Behind legislation, the first laws that dictated what curriculum should be used to measure student achievement and to qualify for federal education dollars. 2009, President Obama offered the bigger carrot of Race to the Top. It was part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and it provided $98 billion in new federal funding for the U.S. Department of Education. $4.3 billion was